Right, good evening, one and all. So my name is Paul Donnelly. I'm the Managing Director for Winbike Medical here in the UK, and excited to be with you this evening, and thank you for sort of giving us your time and sharing your expertise with us as we go through the evening. Basically, this evening we are looking at the evolution of exoskeletons, and also we're going to be sharing some case studies that Ranjit has kindly put together. So the agenda tonight is I'll introduce the speakers, and then Barry's going to lead off with the evolution of exoskeletons. A really interesting presentation, and I'm sure we'll all gain a lot of knowledge from that. And then Ranjit has been working with us, I guess, now for about 4 or 5 months now, Ranjit, and has built up some quite interesting experiences around the GMove suit in particular. And he's got a couple of good case studies that he wants to share with us. What we'll then do is just kind of take questions from the group and share that with the team, and then just get some debate going around what you've seen and what you've heard. If I can ask you to use the chat function as we go along. So if you see something, you want to make a comment on it, just drop it into the chat function, and then we'll be able to sort of pick it up and respond to it when we get to the Q&A. We'll kind of round it all up with a roundtable discussion. People can share their experiences and questions. We're recording the event, as I mentioned earlier, so you'll have a chance to get an edited highlights. So the first speaker, gentleman on the left, is Barry Richards. I'm sure you'll know Barry, many of you do. He's currently Senior Education Director at Stryker Implants, but formerly was Senior Education Director at Exobionics. So huge experience in tonight's topic. And formerly a lead physio at Spire Healthcare, I think at Murrayfield, Barry, if I remember. And then was himself not only a rugby league player, but ended up being lead physio at Bradford Bulls. And we're working with Barry really in the training area around the GMove suit and its applications. And second speaker is Ranjit Mahamani. Ranjit is Director and Lead Neurophysio at Consult Physio, formerly lead physio at Cambridgeshire NHS Community Trust, and again is working with us in training new physios who are looking to come into this technology, and has got some really interesting experience to share with us. You may be wondering who Winbike are. We all funded by 5 partners, all from MSK neurophysio backgrounds. We founded the company in 2013. It's been quite a success story, and we've built the business up to be roughly in 25 countries internationally. We work with about 7,000 international clinics. We've kind of made our name in the professional sporting environment, so things like pro football, rugby, athletics, triathlon, tennis, UK athletics, etc. And we're currently in our MSK business, quite active at the minute in the Euros with England and France and Belgium, and also in the Tour de France and at Wimbledon. So that's kind of where we got started. We then sort of put our business into Asia in 2016. We've got a business based in Seoul that services the Asia Pac community. A lot of our technologies got FDA approval in September 2017. So we've been working with the likes of Hospital for Special Surgery, Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, to give you a few names. And then in 2017, we established the UK company. And since that time, we've established about 120 centers. We're big believers in innovation and bringing innovative technologies into market, probably at the point where they're well past proof of concept and they're into, evidence-based practice. So we tend to do a lot of our teaching and education around a peer-to-peer environment. So you may have an initial conversation with someone like me or one of my team, but a lot of the education is delivered in a peer-to-peer environment. If we look at who we're working with from a clinic, hospital, and education point of view, if I could just ask anybody who's not muted to mute, just so we don't get background noise. In the UK, we're working with Hobbs and Consult Physio Function, really been the sort of the three main companies that have kind of established our first move. But we work extensively in MSK as well as neurophysiology. One thing I'll flag up is that we are about to kick off in September of this year quite a nice study with the University of Winchester and Hobbs looking at the post-stroke patients. So that's an RCT that we'll hope to report on later in the year. So what do we do? I mean, fundamentally, you can break our business into MSK, neurorehabilitation, screening and assessment. So if anybody in the group tonight has an MSK practice, please reach out to us and we can discuss that with you. But this evening is all about the GMove suit and exoskeletons and the evolution. So I'm going to stop my share there. Just going to ask Florence if she could mute. And Jonathan maybe to mute too, just so we don't get background noise, chaps. So Barry, you're first up. So you have the screen, and we look forward to this interesting review of the development of exoskeleton.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for the intro. It's great to be here actually presenting this. I know some of you kind of do know me. For those that don't, Paul gave a brief intro, but I'll kind of go into a little bit more detail. Physio by training, not practicing at the moment, working in the commercial space, have done for the past 10 years, since 2011. As Paul highlighted before, initially went into the kind of the robotic space as the clinical director for Exobionics, Europe, Middle East and Africa, and then later moving into Asia Pacific and helping them set that up as well. Continue to work in the robotic space with Stryker at the moment, looking after all their kind of Mako and robotic side of things as well from an education and integration perspective. I mean, there's some kind of disclaimers from my side. I am a paid consultant by Winback and looking after GMove. I also do some consultancy work and some advisory work for those other robotic technologies that are either at pre-commercialization or just after the commercialization phase, and looking how to make that from a clinical perspective as well. So it's been an interesting journey. And I think this diagram here, or this kind of presentation is very, it's a sky blue presentation. It's an overview. To go into the full evolution would require more than the 20 minutes that we've essentially got, but just to give you a flavor and a taste of what that looks like. And when we look here, way back all the way through into kind of where we are here, it does actually give a good indication of where we are and where we're going. So always start with this one. When you're thinking about exoskeletons, you generally normally think about kind of Iron Man. And, it's not far off now where we are with this. Back in the day, it was a little bit of science fiction. It's more becoming science fact. So the technology that certainly the military exoskeletons are utilizing, there is a lot of kind of hybridization, a lot of cross-pollination of that technology. And that's for the benefit of technology and the benefit of these exoskeletons per se. So where you see Iron Man maybe 10 years ago, where you're seeing this kind of military applications of exoskeletons, you start to see the likes of Talos, you start to see the likes of all of these kind of flying suits, all of these kind of heavy lifting suits. They exist now. I was fortunate to work across some of them, and developers are just leveraging that technology and putting it into their other suits. So when you're looking at an exoskeleton, apologies for that yellow line, I'm not quite sure why that's there, but when you're looking at an exoskeleton, it's the definition really is, it's an external skeleton that supports and protects an animal's body. So in contrast to that kind of internal kind of endoskeleton, really. So if anyone wants to come off mute or in the chat, please do, because I kind of want to think, when do you think kind of exoskeletons were first used? Anyone got any ideas? When do you think exoskeletons, an example of exoskeleton? I can't see the chat, Paul. Anyone saying stuff in there?
Hi, it's
give me 2 seconds, yeah? Someone here, Evolve Case Manager 2000, year 2000.
Okay.
It's Jonathan Fogarty. Barry, I would probably go a little bit earlier than that, say something like the 1980s, something like that.
Anyone else?
Let's get a poll going here. A lot longer ago than that, we think Louise Humes.
Fair enough. All right, so the answer is it's a lot further than that. So if by definition you use that kind of, it's to protect the individual. I mean, you can almost think that suits of armor were essentially an exoskeleton. They were articulated at the joints. They provided this, the wearer with protection. So in theory, exoskeletons were suits of armor. So you start to think about where, if you have that in your mind, think about this is what, in its broader sense, an exoskeleton is, to where I'll take you through the course of the presentation. So go back kind of to what we know now, kind of, and what I'm going to talk about is not end effectors, essentially, like the Lexo or the Lyra or anything like that. We're talking about kind of those powered exoskeletons, Exo, Indigo, Rewalk, all of these guys. So the initial concept goes back to the 1890s by Nicholas Young in Russia, and he kind of created all of these drawings and kind of created the first concept, really. From then, kind of jump forward a few years, 1965 to around 71, General Electric created the Hardyman. And if you remember the film Alien or Aliens with Sigourney Weaver in that kind of that loader where she had that fight, this is kind of what it was based on. Challenges, and it kind of correlates to today's hard exoskeletons, shall we say. Power, massive constraint to utility, and how is it powered, how long do batteries last, weight, stress on the individual, don and doff times, all of these considerations to make it kind of usable both in the clinical setting and also in the home setting as well. So that whole utility, when you're thinking about exoskeletons, whether that's kind of clinical, military, commercial, or industrial, you all have to start to think about these kind of things, really. And as you can imagine, the Hardyman didn't really go anywhere. Well, it did, but it went very slow. And ultimately, it didn't really get integrated into industry. So if you're looking at the journey, we've gone from the Hardyman skeleton. We've gone from the first one in the 1890s through to the 50s with Hardyman, and then you've kind of got the one that was built out at the Pupin Institute in the 60s and 70s, which is the kinematic walker, and that's kind of the forerunner of what we're seeing today. As you can see, it's hydraulic based, no real powered actuators in that respect. And it's kind of where everyone kind of took their benchmark from, really. So a good resource, if you're interested in looking at more exoskeletons or more kind of information, you can go to the exoskeleton report. Just type in that and it'll bring you to this kind of website. So you can imagine when we started this kind of powered exoskeleton kind of journey, certainly, as I said, when I started in 2011, there was probably 2 realistically that were commercially and clinically viable, those being Exobionics and probably Rewalk. in a couple, and rework, sorry, not probably, and rework, in a couple of years that kind of doubled, and then since then it kind of the market grew, and then certainly in the past 5 years it's exploded, and you've got exoskeletons now for, you know, upper limb, lower limb, as I said, you know, commercial, you know, helping them go skiing, for example. You've also got those industrial skeletons, which is now big business, and then also the military ones as well. So that just gives you a flavor of those skeletons. Great quote, great quote. So there's a general appreciation within the scientific and clinical community that these devices make a big difference in people's lives. So if you take that in its context, yes, there's a growing library, there's research out there. We now know that powered exoskeletons do have positive effects, both physiologically and also psychologically. But what we noticed prior to all of this general research being made was anecdotally, so clinically, we were seeing these benefits prior to where all of this information and this research was starting to be developed. So now we've got a body of evidence that suggests, yes, it makes a difference in terms of rehab, in terms of benefit to the wearer. So 4 distinct industries, as I said before, military on the bottom right, we've got the kind of commercial side of things on the bottom left. Top left, we have the industrial, and then obviously where we're focusing today is on the kind of the clinical piece on the top right-hand side. 93 developers so far in the exoskeleton report, 8 commercial, 31 industrial, 10 military. So you can see 44 medical exo developers. It's by far the biggest kind of sector within the exoskeleton kind of industry. So it's becoming very crowded. It's becoming very confused for potentially the clinician and also the patient, the end user. A lot of these suits, Jimmy, can look the same. A lot of them have lots of bells and whistles that do lots of really cool things clinically. But again, the utility is what you should really look at. Power supply. How long do they last for? Weight. Can they be used just in a clinical setting? Do they need support? Do they need a spotter? Do they need a tether? You know, cost, on and off times. You know, you can see there Exo, Rewalk, Indigo, the Autobot, and then HAL with Cyberdyne. So yes, they're all powered suits. They all have different power consumptions. They all do different things, but ultimately they get the person up, they get them walking. Some of them do a little bit more pre-gait stuff, maybe do some advanced gait stuff. But unless you kind of know specifically what you want and how you're going to integrate that into your practice, that's where the challenges lie. Now, also what you need to consider is what happens to the person that's been using these outside of rehab. Can these be used at home? Yes, they can to a point, and certainly I work with some individuals that through, you know, whether that's catastrophic claim injuries or, you know, whether they were financed themselves, they did buy some, certainly an exo, they did buy an exo and they used it at home. It has its limitations, as you can imagine.
There's everything here, from bits of decoration.
So think about the evolution. Think about that suit of armor. Think about going through to kind of the first one in 1890, through to kind of the kinematic walker, through to the powered exoskeletons in the past 10 years. So I don't know if any of you have met Connor or spoken to Connor or watched some of his kind of talks, but obviously working out of Harvard, he kind of started to look at soft exoskeletons as the next evolution on where we're going to go, and it has broad potential. And Connor's currently testing these kind of concepts and where they can go with it, you know, integrating it actually into trousers, you know, or kind of apparel, how they wear that as well. So That's the evolution of where these suits are essentially going to go. Which kind of brings us on to GMove. Now I kind of saw this kind of the end of 2020, and I got in contact with Paul and the team, and I was like, look, how you guys are using that is great for kind of your sports rehab and things, and I understand why you're doing that, but I think you've got a real opportunity here to really help those patients. Now, those patients may be using these powered exoskeletons in the clinic, and this may then bridge that gap. Or it may be that you can actually have this within a clinical setting because it's cost effective. You know, all of those things when we're talking about utility, it doesn't, you know, they aren't capital expense. They easy to put on. You know, we're starting to see great power supply. You can work it for a long period of time. We're starting to see anecdotal evidence of benefit, like what we did with the powered exoskeletons, and that's where as Paul alluded to, we're starting to put some research together with some key partners and some key institutions as well. So, soft exoskeleton for low extremity mobility, lightweight, wearable, has, you know, combines design and control principles. It's functional, and as I said, we're getting those self-reported benefits of better mobility, balance, control, gait quality, and endurance, really. And with that, I'm gonna wrap that up. And Paul, do you want to do questions and answers now, or do you want to do it at the end?
Well, I'll tell you what, hang on a second. First of all, Barry, thanks for that review. I was stunned when I saw your presentation earlier, but just when you conceptualize what an exoskeleton actually is, you know, how far back it goes. And one of the challenges we had was trying to sort of bridge this gap between, you know, a patient with MS, spinal injury unit, spinal injury, you know, Guillain-Barré in hospital. Clearly, they've got a certain level of resource behind them, but what happens when they go back into the community? So that was one of the things that when we started looking at the GMove suit, this goes back 36 months or almost, we took a system that was active compression, used in sports medicine, used in recovery, used in rehabilitation. And like, as you can imagine, physios being physios, then started to explore, well, what other applications could this have? So that's what took us into the neurophysiology side of things. And so we had a couple of things in mind. One, the design criteria had to be, you know, obviously fit for purpose. So we did a lot of research on the published evidence. Two, it had to be affordable because some of these technologies cannot be funded potentially by the NHS. They have to be patient funded or clinic funded. So we wanted to make sure that we could get something that was at a certain price point. And then thirdly, we wanted to ensure that when we delivered this back into the community, we started small and we started with a sort of a physio-led coached support program for the patient. So that's kind of got us to where we are today. And, you know, if there are questions now to Barry, then fire them in and we'll take them. But you may want to just hear a little bit of what Manjit has to say in terms of his experience, and then we do some Q&A at the back end.
I think Jonathan's got his hand up. Jonathan.
Thank you. Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Paul. Barry, when we were going through, you mentioned that exos can be used at home, but there are limitations. What can you just sort of elaborate on the limitations?
Simple things like going up and down stairs or going through doorways. If you're using crutches and things, or using, you know, wheeled relators, going through kind of that thing, you know, if they're going to be used at home and that person hasn't got that ability to, you know, be self-sufficient, do they need people to spot them, walk with them? You know, there's all those challenges. Carpet, you know, if they're working on, if they have sensors in their feet, you know, does that carpet throw off those sensors to be able to walk? You know, are they truly a mobility device where they go outside and they walk around? Not really, you know. So the majority of these exoskeletons, these powered ones, are clinical devices, but they can be used at home. They can be used at home, but they don't have the same utility as they do in clinical practice, certainly in my experience of working with them.
Just unmute myself. Thanks. Thanks, Barry. Yeah, interesting. So it's a kind of an environment limitation then, really. So the limitation is on where it's being used, perhaps, rather than the idea that one just couldn't use one independently, because there are. I mean, there are people. I mean, when you look at the footage of what's her name that did the London Marathon in her suit,
Claire Lomas.
Thank you very much, Claire Lomas, and I'm sure she must have put hours of preparation into doing the London Marathon, and still uses it independently. And I've got one or two clients who are still using their Exo in a clinic setting, but who definitely want to buy one as part of their claim, and so probably need to think more carefully about the environment in which they use it then. Yeah,
it's a definite. The one thing when you're talking about, it's a good example, and I know John's on the call, and I thought Stephen was going to be on the call as well. So the one thing with Claire's, what they don't show you behind the scenes is how many times it broke down. Walking in the suit, it's not designed to walk 26 miles. It's not designed to walk outside. It's not waterproof. These type of things, water ingress into the motors. It's not designed to do that. And also, Claire, she was getting blisters in her foot and things as well from walking. So you have to have all of this. You have to match what the suit does to what its intended use is. And that's sometimes where that understanding needs to happen, and that education, from a clinical perspective, but also from the end user's perspective as well. How is it going to be used? What's the intended use? And is it safe to be used in that environment?
Interesting, Barry, thanks. And one more, if I may. Apologies, Paul.
No, not at all. That's the whole purpose of this evening.
Is it, I know it's probably difficult to answer, but let me fire it away anyway. Is the jury still out on whether this is a therapy device or a means of mobility?
It's a very good question, and it's been going around for about 10 years. John, hand up, jump in if you want, because you've got quite.
Yeah, I would say, I think the Lomas one was a sort of, at the end of the day, she did a mile a day over 26 days, with a lot of Matt White behind holding her up, on an older device. I think a better example is probably in 2018 when Simon Kindlesides did the London Marathon unaided in the rewalk with me and Steve, and did it in two halves with one breakdown.
So it's a good point. John makes the technology has advanced. It's kind of what I'm saying, the technology has advanced significantly. That's why you can see those, 44 developers, and they are advancing technology. Batteries are getting better. Going back to your point, do I think they're true mobility devices, or are they clinical? I don't, in my personal opinion, in my clinical opinion, and kind of I don't believe they are a true mobility device in its broadest form. They can be used as mobility devices, but they have to be used correctly in terms of, the intended use. Goes back to that intended use, and can it be used for that as well? There just needs to be forethought around that. If they're being bought purely for mobility, then you need to really understand, does the suit or does the technology do what that person wants to buy it for, and so their expectations are managed.
Yeah, and also it's not going to be their sole mobility aid.
No.
So you know, in the same way as I've got an old man, you know, Volvo estate for moving kit around, I wouldn't half mind a little sporty soft top. So I think the Exo would be kind of part of that story, that you've got it'll never, I'm sorry, for some time yet, it won't become a sole means of mobility, but for certain users, it's definitely practical at home and in the community. But you're absolutely right. It shouldn't be charged into, otherwise it becomes yet another expensive piece of kit that people hang their clothes on. It's got to be trialed. Users got to totally understand the commitments that's involved. I mean, I did a case earlier this year for the dark side, for a guy with a rewalk and above knee amputation, who Ottobock and Rewalk club put their heads together, got a prosthesis that would work with the Rewalk. He tried a 3-month trial at home and in and around his property and in and around a small village he lives in. That went really well, and he bought one out of his interim. But you nail on the head there. You've got to consider the individual, consider how they're going to use it, check their expectations, and make sure it's matched to them as an individual and the environment they want to use it in.
I think that's a great point.
Thank you.
From our
Thanks, Johnny.
experience so far, John, Barry, one of the things we see is this bridge between the hospital sort of post-event care and then the at-home care, and whether a patient, you know, you've got to do all the environmental stuff. You've got to absolutely study their environment. Is it a bungalow? Is it up and down stairs? Have they got steps? Have they got, you know, all that stuff comes into consideration. I think what we're trying to do is bridge a gap whereby the cost of finding out once you've deployed a technology is not prohibitive. And it's whenever we do this kind of innovative, you know, it's innovation service education. So when we look at innovation, one of our check boxes is this something that genuinely can be either patient funded, clinic funded, or state funded, so to speak? And that's been a driver behind a lot of the things we've done. Just in the chat, Sarah Cox, Sarah said here, limitations. If don't have family or carers to help get it on, the GMove has worked well for patients of mine who live alone and are using it almost daily. I don't know, Sarah, would you come off mute and maybe just share that experience a little bit? Hopefully Sarah's still on the call.
Sorry, yes, I'm still here, but
Hi,
just finding the mute button. Hello.
Could you maybe build on that a little bit?
Well, basically, I'm still quite new to the GMove suit itself, but what I realised was that it is actually much more person-friendly, and that it has helped a particular patient of mine who lives alone, and she's actually able to get it on and off herself quite easily compared to other options that are out there. So limitations, as quite rightly said by John and yourself earlier, it's about the right patient and who's the motivation and their ability. And this is a spinal cord injury patient who is using it. So but she's it's her legs that obviously the issue, and her hands are fully functioning. But she's able to do it herself, which is great.
Yeah, fantastic. More people can be independent, the better. So let's pause there. Ranjith, do you want to? Yeah.
No, I just want to really join into that conversation with John and Barry, and I completely appreciate how evolutionary it's still pretty much in the beginning stage in terms of how the robotics can be used, or can it be used as a therapeutic device, or can it be used as an ambulatory device? And I've been using now for well over about 4 years into different technologies of robotic, either for as a clinical tool or is it for as an ambulatory tool. My argument is, however in early phases we are in, and I mean, it is it's evolving on a day by day. And as you said, there's more competitors on the market, there are more and more products really coming into play. If we really do represent them for some kind of robotic therapy, we got to keep in mind about what's going to happen in about 10 years' time. not necessarily looking at what is right out there now. So I think I always really feel when I really write recommendations and report, there is a room for robotic therapy in the part of the claim, so that when the time comes, that funding is available for them to go on to the best of the available technologies. And in terms of how the existing technologies are, they're so variable to each other. Some of them, they have foot sensors. Some of them, they're purely ambulatory. They don't have the sensors distally. They have more proximal, which in case the flooring doesn't really matter a lot, they are really used for more indoor and outdoor. For example, rewalk. It doesn't matter what level of flooring, as long as it's a level flooring, it's not sensitive to carpets. Whereas in the case of an exoskeleton, an ExoGT or an NR, it's very sensitive to the carpets, because obviously the sensors are very flow based. And I mean, it is one of those things, and they're heavier, they substantially heavier. The physios using that, I mean, I use it, I get a heck of a lot of back pain, whether it's not easy, and particularly when they are in early stages. But I have got clients who have progressed to a stage and now they walk pretty much very smoothly and with exos without really needing a lot of help from the clinician. So the answer to that is, with Indigos now coming in about 11, 13 kilograms, where you could really carry them in a sports bag, I seriously think they are ambulatory devices. I mean, where if there's more variables, the more kind of tunings that you could do, they have to stay as a clinical device, for example, an XONR, because there's far more variables to choose from, which means you can't actively lead a client or a patient, however you want to call them, to be able to mobilize independently, which is not feasible in very many respects. But I think it's in its very early stages of evolution, and it's constantly evolving. And we as clinicians, we need to really support that, so that in the future, the same device of what we really practically think now has got lots of restriction. It's not a device for like 26 miles of walking. Maybe one day, 10 years down the line, it will evolve into that. I don't know, that's my feeling about it.
Interesting. Roger, that's great. I think we should probably get into your case studies, Roger. It's probably a good bridge into your experiences so far. So
Thank
you have the floor, and I think you should be able to show your screen.
Let's have a look. My book is playing up a little bit.
It's always a challenge, isn't it? Going from Teams to Zoom to, here we go. Yeah, fantastic.
I'm in there. Yeah,
Wonderful.
thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks for giving that opportunity. I mean, I'm quite new to GMove. I'm a neurophysiotherapist. I've been really working with exoskeletons for well over about 4 years now. I used a variety of exoskeletons in the past. And I think Christian Graham approached me from Winback about maybe in November last year. And initially, I didn't really felt they would be really more appropriate for my client sets. I just stayed away from it. And finally, one of John's, is it Matt? Is that right, John? He's been using it since the early part of this year. And he came on one day, was demonstrating to me, what and how it could be really used and how they are using it more productively. So I went in with thinking this is an enhancement suit, okay, based on vasotherapy, increasing more venous return, more oxygenation to tissues. There we go. So people are really able to really exercise it for much longer. So that is the idea that I really had in my head when I initially went into GMove. And so I was kindly offered a trial for a month. So I thought, okay, I'll just have this unit and how and where I could really use it. I mean, I have very limited in terms of like a sports rehab or this and that, but predominantly involved with mostly brain injuries and spinal injury clients. And one day I was really thinking about, how I could really put in as physios, you always really think, oh, this is the concept. can I induce this concept in any of my clients who really would benefit with some kind of vasotherapy? And that's how this case study is all about. I'll just give you a bit of a background on this one. Just give me a second. Why is it not going into the next one? So I have a client who is a spinal cord injury, is a C3 incomplete, Asia B, hasn't got much motor power. He has a few, like 1 to 2 on Oxford scale. His functional status was he's as a wheelchair user, fully hoisted on a head controlled wheelchair. As I said, no significant movement pattern, either in the upper limbs or in the lower limbs. Tones, usually about 2 in Oxford scale, but with fatigue, it does really worsens quite significantly. It does has a problem with the neuropathic pain. His baseline blood pressure is always about 106/68. Generally tolerates about 2 to 3 hours of sitting out in the chair, and then he gets fatigues, then he gets back into the chair. One of our goals is to trying to get him into an upright standing with an easy stand, mainly aimed at increasing bone density and to improve his postural drop. And he does experience a significant postural drop. So naturally, if we do really try to get him about like 50 degrees in an easy stand, we hoist him out in there, and blood pressure drops down sometimes to less than 60, unreadable. So if I just really give you an idea of how he is, just give me a second. So that's, I was just really giving you an idea of like what is a postural hypertension. If some of those guys who doesn't know about postural hypertension, if you do try to get somebody either from a sitting to standing or from a lying to sitting, if the blood pressure drops down just with a systolic blood pressure of anything more than 20 millimeter of mercury pressure, or a diastolic pressure of more than 10 millimeter, and leading to symptoms of dizziness, that's lack of blood pressure, blood flowing through to the brain. And when they don't really get a lot of oxygen going out, and they get confused, they get fatigued, they sometimes get nauseated, they do get blood vision. And my client does really get a lot of dizziness, and often he just gets like, I'm going to faint, and then you just drop him back. So this, how do we normally really manage a postural hypertension, is using some kind of vasoactive drugs, which does presses your vessels up, thereby really building a blood pressure. So he was tested on midodrine, and again, instead of really helping with raising blood pressure, he ended up really having further hypertensions and fatigue, which again is one of those side effects of those medications. And then we did really look at is there any other contributing agents, particularly given he was on pregabalin, to see whether is that being a causative factor, just bringing the blood pressure down. Again, that was ruled out as well. Then we did a graduated standing program, which I've been really doing from last March till the beginning of this year. We generally get him up, get him hoisted, try 30 degrees, 40 degrees, 50 degrees. Okay, then he doesn't tolerate it, then lower him down. And this been happening, like usually I do it once every other week. The carers try him about 2 times, about sometimes 3 times a week. And that's where we were. We were very static. We were not moving forward anywhere. And with often just with a combination of an exercise program, stretches, increasing water intake, the things that you do day in and out of to improve postural hypertension, and none of these things did work. And this is when it came in time. I had the GMove suit. I know it's an ambulatory suit. It wasn't the intended use for this one, but I was just thinking, well, it's the vasotherapy, it's a vasocompression, and is that something that I could really use? And so this is a typical day of when we get him to standing. Just give me a second, I'm just going to move this a bit away so that I'm not focusing. Okay, yeah, I mean, when we do get him into about 50 degrees of standing, you can see his systolic blood pressure went down to about 79/59, and he's getting tachycardic, where his heart is beating much higher to try and compensate and build the blood pressure. But then all these blood pressures are really taken about 3 minutes from every degree raise. So if I'm moving him from 30 degrees to 40 degrees, I generally allow him to see whether his heart rate raises to compensate. And it is that happening? And this is what happens when he gets up to 50 degree. He just goes down to that blood pressure. When you get that blood pressure, he gets dizzy and he feels fainty. We sit him down, and that's a very common thing. So I'm just going to really show you guys a video that I really made. A second. How do I minimize that? Okay. Guys.
Possible to get a little commentary, Roger, just on.
Oh, were you not hearing anything?
No, we didn't get the volume.
No, you'd have to enable the sound on the.
Oops. Okay, just give me a second.
Yeah, no worries.
Good thing you said that, Paul. I was just, because I could really hear it, I was assuming that everybody was able to really hear that.
I remember listening to the guys' kind of commentary, which I thought was quite interesting.
Is that better now? Can you hear that?
It's a setting that you'd have to set. It's a setting on the on your side that when you share the video, you need to share the sound as well.
I think you could probably just talk it through, Roger, in the interest of time.
Okay, yeah, it's probably just, I'll just really do that. Yeah. I'll just really come off that. It's a shame that I couldn't really work it out. Okay. Yeah, so you can just really see what happened in here when his blood pressure really drops down and he gets a bit more tachycardic in there. And that's when, so I had the GMove in, but hasn't activated that until he get to the point where he was really symptomatic. And then at 60 degree, you can just see I raised it to the boosting program, which is the program 3, to 70 millimeter of mercury pressure. And you can see the blood pressure immediately raised it to 150/63. And his heart rate came down to 69. And subsequently, I raised it further gradually. Again, these are only done in about 3 minutes interval. And at 80 degree, his blood pressure dropped back again for 77/57 and 89. Again, I raised the cuff pressure to 90 millimeter of mercury pressure, and he was back again to where he should be. So, I mean, this was an ideal aid, because the only other way that you could really do somebody in is to encourage activity in standing. But my client, he can't really do that because he hasn't got enough motor power to do it, and it is a static frame. So when you go on a static frame, you haven't got really much control over that. So for me, it just worked as a treat, and for my my client, and it just absolutely worked in the way that I intended to really use it for. And I was just thinking, so what is the what's the way out of it? Okay, is tolerating more standing in there, and how we could really encourage more his own response of how he's going to compensate himself rather than the suit really doing it for him. And that's where I really went in for more intermittent programming. So intermittent programming works with a way you just boost it up, and then you just really go an intermittent, okay, 60 seconds. The machine isn't really going to really help himself, giving him the opportunity to really do his own venous return, and again, just build it back again. And we've been using it since now from March, and where are we now in June? And now he's able to tolerate about 70 degrees, roughly about 65 to 70 degrees. And he's totally asymptomatic. He still gets more symptomatic when you go over 70 milligram. And again, we've been using GMove as a combination to help him with. But the overall goal is to get him into an upright standing without a GMove in the due course. But that's how we really used it. And for me, it works certainly as a treat.
First of all, thanks. I mean, it's a really interesting. I think you said yourself it's kind of a little bit off-label, but it just shows the ingenuity that the physio community have, and then applying technologies in areas where we hadn't thought about. It's given us some real food for thought. So, is there a second case study, Ranjit, or do you want to just take
that was
questions?
actually on us as a video? Unfortunately, the video doesn't really work. Okay. But I'm quite happy to really share that into to the links on the chat box, or you could really chat to all the participants later.
For sure. So let me open it up to.
I mean, I'm happy to really answer any questions, and if they do really have.
So questions and comments just on what you've heard so far. Anything you want to share or kind of question the panel on? Please go ahead now.
I think that's a brilliant case study. Thank you so much for that.
Very welcome.
I think, I mean, I was in the previous discussion getting a bit uncomfortable with the apples and oranges, because we're not going to be standing and walking the kind of clients in the GMove that we can with Exos. And I don't know, whilst it was really interesting at the beginning, I don't know it's wholly helpful to be talking rewalks, Rexes, free walks, indigos, when actually we've got a really special thing here that has got some really useful, that's great. We all suffer with clients, and that's something we're going to be looking at this week. I love it, brilliant. And we've had us and other neurophysios, certainly for the semi-ambulant patients, it's kind of been a real, it's a great bit of kit, a real booster. But I think it's something in its own right. I don't know. As I said, really interesting. We all love talking about exos, and it is a soft exoskeleton, but it's more than that in a way because of the pressure and the alternating pressure and the intermittent. And it's become one of our favourite bits of kit at the moment. We love it. It's probably got more. It probably has more use in our clinics than the exos at the moment, to be fair. So yeah, no, that's all I got to say. But again, thank you, Ranjit. Excellent. Really good case study. We should try and get that published. It's spot on.
Thank you. I mean, I've been using, again, with the one other area where I've been using predominantly which is what on my second case study is, and I really made it as a lovely video, and it's a shame that I couldn't really get out to really work with it, connect the audio, is around joint proprioception. And that's one of those areas that I really get a lot of patients with joint proprioceptive issues. And I mean, how has that worked? I mean, in that case study, I have a client who he can't really feel where his knee is, where his ears. When he walks, he tends to use his eyes as his legs. So he constantly sees where he's placing his leg. And that's the only way he could recognize what he's really doing. And I have used with him, and he was able to do with his closed eyes and precisely really tell me his joint position. And I couldn't just really believe it. And I just tried a few more times, again and again. And then I was really trying to rationalize it. How did this work? And I was just thinking, okay, how we normally try to treat, ST diagnosis, more by counter irritation, go brushing, work with barefoot, this and all. So I was just thinking, I was relating myself of how the GMove work is close, the pressure, and probably that's what really is creating that feedback. So I was really trying to really clinically just work it out. How did it work with him? But the outcome was great, and he's using it, but he's still not having consistent outcome as like my client who had a postural hypertension, because he's making outcome And there is a way out of GMove eventually, and which is what we want to really see as clinicians. You know, you use a device and you don't want somebody to be living on the device, and they're really dependent on the device.
Yep.
And you want an outcome to it, which is happening in there. But with my other client, I mean, I only started using with him very recently. But again, joint proprioception is one of those things that you don't have like an instant turnaround and just, but it's amazing. And they both of them, there's two clients have been using it, and they both have their own kit. And for them, it just works the treat, and they just find a huge difference. And one, she just started really actually walking with that to the supermarkets. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And she said, I don't care. And I'll just really walk with her, because when I walk with that, and her argument is, when I walk with it, I don't look at my feet. I just use my sticks and just keep walking. So, I mean, again, the other thing is, in comparison with all the exoskeletons or, you know, we have, I don't know, I mean, I use an ExoGT to get somebody in and out. It takes about like 15 minutes. However, you know, you familiarize with yourself, you know, how often you use that, it doesn't matter. But whereas getting a GMO, because it's a soft suit, just literally takes about a few minutes, 2-3 minutes. You just get it on, and they can independently get it on. And so, I don't mean, and I mean, how it worked with, you know, joint proprioception, and my best guess is more with the pressure, and it's a close contact pressure. Giving that feedback is probably how it's just working. As again, I'm quite happy to really share that on the probably on the chat link or on an email subsequently to James and sorry, to Paul, and then Paul can then forward it to you all.
Very happy to do that. I think what we find interesting is like, it's like, you know, personally, a little bit like Barry, been involved in so MSK technology, innovative technologies over the last 25 years or so. And eventually what happens is you start very broadly, and then you start to understand where any particular technology has its application. And that's what we're trying to do, particularly with the GMove, is to look at the post-stroke patient. You know, what are the appropriate pressures? What are the appropriate exercises? You know, what's the care package around that individual? You know, and I think in post-stroke, obviously, depending on the severity and how quickly you get after people, the loss of muscle can be quite significant. And one of the interesting things about the blood flow restriction side of things is, if you can get the patient to progress where you're getting that combination of rehabilitation and hypertrophy, you know, you can actually, hopefully, you know, sort of get that patient to where they have to get to better. The other interesting thing we found is in this kind of first 12 months is looking at MS patients who are, again, completely different group, is trying to understand where we can almost not halt, but kind of give them a kind of quality of life, holding on to what they've got for a period of time. There's a great guy on LinkedIn called Mark Webb, who we've been working with for about 9 months. And, you know, Mark's he's an amazing character, actually. He used to run Euro Disney and, you know, worked in Carphone Warehouse. Then he was diagnosed with MS. And it's been a massive life change for him. But in combining what he does with Alter G, his normal physio, plus his GMove, etc., he's found a level of, in inverted commas, lifestyle that works well for him. And then you go to things like Gillian Barry. You go to some of those other conditions like spinal injury, where depending on the patient's profile, and everybody's different, but how do you progress them from hospital back into the community and back into, in inverted commas, an independent life? And that's where, you know, working with the group around this table here, our kind of vision for this is that we're talking to Royal Bucks, we're talking to Stanmore, we're talking to Stoke Mandeville, but what we've decided to do is to almost at the end of the summer stop and then say, okay, what have we learned? How can we, in inverted commas, titrate the experience that we've got so far, and how can we then take it forward into those different areas, so post-stroke, MS, spinal injuries, so that we don't rush it. And I've seen so many times in the past 25 years where a new technology comes out, it gets all the sort of PR side of things. It gets on TV and people get super excited and then very disappointed. So what we're trying to do with this group and building around this group is to make sure that responsibly we understand where it does work, and even more importantly where it doesn't work, and then try to put a pathway together that's physio-led, so that it's not somebody buying something and then they hope it works. We're very keen to make sure that we continue with the groups we're working with to put the patient, put the technology in your hands, give you the evidence that we've got so far, and then let you as the experts tell us where this is going to be appropriate, and then expand it from there. So just to give you a little bit of insight into our thinking.
Ash has got his hand up, Paul.
Yeah, Ash, please go ahead.
Hi guys. Yeah, sorry. I've read about this. I've watched a couple of videos, and of course, it was good to see the presentation as well. Any idea on kind of, unless I missed the first part, have they used it on pediatric clients, and how does it work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the short answer is no. The current configuration we have with the suit is really designed for, let me say, the adolescent, 14, 15-year-old and above. I mean, over time, obviously, like I was saying earlier, we will develop this into, I mean, our methodology is very simple. It's kind of first do no harm, to make sure that you sort of test this in a safe environment. So I think in time there potentially could be uses in there, but at this moment in time we haven't gone down that pathway because we're still 2 years from, let's call it the CE marking. So it's still very early in the journey. But do you have a particular kind of sort of?
I was just wondering. Yeah, it's just particularly with somebody, because somebody was saying about ataxia. I was just wondering more around pediatric clients with ataxia, or clients who are a bit flaccid. I think in proprioception and other things, it could. Keeping in mind it has worked with adults, I don't see any reason why it should not work with.
No, I think the limitations would be the suit itself is. I mean, there was a patient, I can't remember if it was one of John's patients or one of Hobbs's patients, a young lad, Mikey, who was like 13, 14 years old, who just had an amazing response to it. And in ataxia, to be fair, what we've seen so far is it's kind of a 50-50 response. And I think it goes back to all that stuff that you guys know more than I. It's clinical reasoning. How much can the patient do? How much mobility is there? How much balance can they absorb? Because the compressor really could move you forward. And I would say ataxia at the minute is we're in a learning curve. Louise Humes, you've just made a comment here. Maybe you could expand on that, Louise. I'll read it out first. It says, yes, I find it really helps one of my clients with ataxia following a brain injury whose walking patterns improved significantly, I feel, due to this proprioception and general biofeedback. Louise, would you want to expand on that?
Yeah, hi. So this chap had a brain injury a few years ago, and his main problem is ataxia. He's got fantastic muscle power, but he struggles with core stability and his ataxia. So his foot placement is just really, really wild, really struggles to get his feet down. He tends to sort of hang on and find something to fix with. So he tends to use his upper limbs. I find de-weighting the upper limbs really helps him. When we tried the GMove, he had really struggled with core stability and used to just hinge from his upper sort of mid-thoracic region to stabilize himself. Walking around the gym just a couple of times with a G suit on, took it back off, and he'd actually was just able to engage that core, sort of find himself a bit more. And he said, I feel like I can reset myself now. So yeah, the proprioceptive feedback he got was great. He could just find his legs, he just felt like he could feel them again, which was really brilliant to see.
Appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, Mikey's one of our guys, and he's done really well.
Okay.
he is the adolescent, but he's quite a tall, gangly kid, so it kind of fitted. But yeah, no, definitely, it would be nice to see it in a pediatric.
How old is he, John, if you don't mind me asking?
14, 15.
Okay.
John, just on Mikey, we should maybe have a side conversation, because what we've been able to do is, building on the successes we've had so far, been able to sort of bring in a number of demo suits. And I was quite keen to sort of work with you on Mikey, because when we saw his initial video, I know he's challenged on the financial side. So more than happy to kind of discuss, how we might be able to support him on that.
No, that would be
from our side.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's. I mean, the fact that he's sort of posting up videos. I mean, a bit like the other lady who Randy was saying about, doesn't mind going to the shops. Mikey doesn't mind, going to the park and exercising in the park.
Yeah.
It's not, and I think that's the nice thing about it, design-wise. It doesn't look incredibly out of place in a way that the hard exoskeleton is just going to look odd in the community.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that offline, and we'll see how we can
indeed.
support it.
Yeah. Perfect.
Jonathan's got a question, Paul.
Jonathan,
Thanks.
fire away.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks. Just thinking about the exos now again in particular. And Paul, apologies. You may have touched on this when you were talking, particularly when you mentioned that a couple of the spinal injury centres. Do all of the UK spinal injury centres have access to an exo now, irrespective of which one?
No.
And why is that? One of the things I'm a tetraplegic myself. I don't know if any others know that, but I'm a C5-6, having gone through Southport Spinal Injury Centre 34 I'm surprised myself, 34 years ago now. And one of the things that frustrates me is that we now have such short rehabilitation periods in the spinal injury centres for people, often only maybe 4 or 5 months. And that period of time is giving such little opportunity for patients now after spinal cord injury to be exposed to this type of equipment, be it exos, be it FES. We've moved forward so far and so much in the equipment and the therapy support that's available for people after SCI, and yet, by contrast, I spent nearly 10 months in Southport after my injury. This equipment wasn't available then, and yet now it is. Patients are in and out the centre service so quickly that they're not even going to see this. We don't even have an exo in the centres, and even if we did, what would the chance be for these patients to see it? And I just wonder if there's something we can do to get more. I understand about the fund. You come back and go, well, how would an ordinary patient after spinal cord injury, without the access to litigation, fund it? Let's perhaps put that to one side at the moment, and let's get it out in front of patients. Perhaps that's a bit of a soapbox moment, as well as a question, as well as a point. Thank you.
I can take this from a commercial side of thing, and being a physio, John can probably comment a little bit as well, from the kind of litigation side of maybe. I've been around every single spinal injury centre in the UK, probably several times, and the initial barrier was cost, obviously, as you can imagine, and it still probably is a barrier to a point. Then the other one was, well, there's no evidence. Now the evidence is coming. So I think there's also consideration on how you would integrate that into a care pathway. As you said, there was a relatively short period of time for a patient now, anyway, in rehab. They have to do so much, and it would, where does that sit in that pathway? The likes of what Ranjit does and John does and things as well. Post discharge, that's where the true benefit and the true utility of these devices really come into play, because you can then have that real opportunity to rehab.
And it's the
Yeah, I
time
mean,
as well, isn't that right, Barry? I mean,
Yeah.
2 hours, at least you need about an hour and a half or two.
Yeah,
I mean, Sheffield has recently sold theirs. Sheffield had one. They had the LG.
I installed that. Oh no.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
They sold theirs purely because they just haven't got the time in the world, with the volume of patients. And it is a classic, not spinal injuries, any NHS. I mean, we all worked in NHS for years. I worked for 18, 19 years before I came out. It's the time. They just don't have the legacy of the time. I don't think cost is not, maybe it's a factor, but not hugely.
There's also the way that, I can't really comment from the others, but certainly from the way that EXO's been set up from the onset, was with the kind of the regs and the user manual, is you need 2 people to operate it effectively. I don't know if that's still the same or whether or not they've changed. I did fight to get that. I did fight to get that changed back in the day, but it still is there. It's like, and the way that it's structured in terms of clinically, you need to go through the certain amount of training. You need to go through your level 1, your level 2, and you can't work with any other level 1s until you've done a level 2, and it's a week's investment to get each training. There's that level of investment, not just from a capital expense, but also the investment internally in terms of man hours to be able to get trained on it, build your competency, and then you can't really operate it in isolation because you're kind of going off label. So there's all that to consider as well.
I mean, in terms of repetitive therapy, Jonathan, I think you got the answer on the evolution to that is static repetitive therapy units like Lexo. I mean, I'm thinking about incorporating that into my clinical practice now. I went in to just observe how it works in Hull. It literally needs a rehab assistant. Once an assessment has been really done, a hoisting system, within literally 2 minutes, you're on the unit, and on the 3rd minute, you're on a gait cycle. And I really like that idea. It's how easy you can use it. Perhaps it doesn't give you a functional perspective from moving from a place to another. If you're thinking about using it as an ambulatory terms, maybe not. Then you still have to really look at things like Indigo or, Rex or like, the Rewalk or one of those. But if you're just looking at just purely in terms of gaining a motor recovery, if you are an incomplete and you want some form of repetitive therapy, great. Or if you are a complete, then you want to do some degree of maintenance work, then again, it's easier and you don't need a lot. I mean, I just love it because, the costs are still very substantial, it goes in hundreds of thousands and the maintenance, this and all. But I think in 5-10 years time with more players coming in and what Barry has just, I didn't realize there's so many commercial competitors coming in, that many numbers. That was a big surprise to me. But I think that is a welcome news. The more they come, the more they sell, the cost is going to come down.
For sure.
And that's going to really benefit the wider community. There's no doubt about it at all. And your biggest barriers, as said, Barry is right. How many people you could train in the clinic and how many they stay with you for how long. And it's always a challenge. And all these things, getting the training and getting somebody feeling competent to do it is so different to a training process, and this takes months and a lot of money and investment.
Thank you. When you go through it, it is logical, I guess. The whole, the costs, yes, and then you think that the people that are going to use it, and perhaps you've got a mixed gym where you've got some Tetris who can't use it and those paraplegics who can use it, and the kind of, oh, it's not suitable for you and why not, and that level of perhaps understanding. So yeah, when you talk through it, it does the reasons why this hasn't been widely adopted perhaps by the SCI Centre physiotherapy teams is there actually. So yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, and
also with the shorter time that people are in as inpatients, there's just the basics to get going, isn't it? There's a lot of discharge skills that need to be established.
Yeah, absolutely, John. Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you.
Question here, guys, that came in from Amy Crosby. So let me just read it out, and then I'll give you a little perspective on it from our side. So Amy's saying, with regard to the GMove suit, is this an item that is more commonly purchased for the individual or something that is loaned out. So just to give you a little comment on that, I mean, how we kind of make this available as a technology, we're still, you know, working it through, because it's 2 months post the, sorry, 12 months, 24 months post the CE. So the kind of model we have at the minute is there's kind of 3 options. So the first option is that the patient through the clinic can buy the technology. So a typical GMove suit is £2,500 plus VAT. Okay, so most patients that we're seeing coming through clinics are able to waive the VAT because they're VAT exempt. So it's 2.5K, and they can either buy it outright for cash, or increasingly they can actually lease it over a 2-year period for something in the region of, you know, 55, 60 quid a month, for example. So that's kind of option 1. The second option is that we would sell the suit to the clinic for £2,000, and then the clinic would sell it to the patient with a care package around it, so a coaching package for 2.5. So there's, in inverted commas, you know, the neurophysio practices are covering their cost, and obviously there's a little bit in it for them. The third element is that, and we're beginning to look at this quite seriously now, is the kind of short-term rental. So someone can take a rental suit for, I think it's £175 a month, so $525 for a 3-month commitment. And the reason we're doing that is that A, it gives the patient the ability to, for a relatively modest outcome, you know, acquire the technology, be coached by the physio, and then at the end of that 3-month period, they either roll over into another 3 months, or they buy the suit and we take off the rental from the purchase price, or they return it. So we're trying to be as innovative as we can in making this technology, you know, available in an affordable way. So that's just to answer Emmy's question. Jonathan Fogarty, I have to leave, I'm afraid. Thank you very much for a useful presentation. Much appreciated. Thank you for your input, John. It's been great to meet you. Okay, so we're kind of coming a little bit towards the end of our session here. One of my colleagues actually is John from France, Pierre Lubin. Pierre's one of the founding members of Winback, and is personally responsible for the international rollout of this technology. So I'm wondering, Pierre, if you maybe share just a little bit of the experiences we're seeing in other countries, that could be quite useful.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Yeah. Sorry, I've been a bit late, but no, we are very excited about the recent developments around the GMove over the last 12 months. It's been very promising with a lot of different patients, actually. I know that in the UK you've done a lot with post-stroke patients. In France also we've done a lot of developments on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome patients and Parkinson patients also, where we've seen a very significant improvement in the overall function, and how the patients were able to work with the GMove. As you mentioned, Paul, we are also developing different models for the patients to get access to the technology and be as innovative as possible everywhere. So we are also developing the patient's rental, which gives the patient the taste of the technology, and also, as you said, to acquire it and to be able also to actually make sure that this is meaningful for them in their daily life. With this technology, we are caring about patients which are both on who are both on acute and chronic phase. And for the chronic patients, where you can probably delay, you can improve the daily conditions. It's been very it's been very useful for a lot of for different type of patients. So we are very enthusiastic and also very emotional about what we see everywhere. And yeah, we are. We want to, of course, we want to be able to educate the physicians and the doctor faster, and with also a stronger clinical case, which we are building now, and that's probably what we are also putting a lot of resources and energy at the moment. So to have a, let's say, a standard application of the GMove. So that's what we that's basically what we are working intensively on.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. It's always good to get one of the nice things about Winback, as I mentioned in my introduction, is we're touching about 25 countries now. And so when you kind of harvest all of the feedback from, you know, the UK and Ireland and the States and continental Europe, Asia, Japan, it's very, very rewarding. It's also, you know, it also gives us a lot more of that. How do we kind of guide with you, you know, where this is going to be most impactful in the various different conditions. So, well, look, guys, I mean, and girls, it's coming up to the witching hour now. I want to thank Barry and Ranjit for their presentations. I want to thank you all for your contributions and participation.